Acclaimed lecturer Fred Foldberry once wrote that all of the social problems in the world can essentially be blamed on three causes: ignorance, apathy, and greed. While this is technically true, all greed is intrinsically caused by narcissism, an unhealthy absorption with oneself. With this revised list of ignorance, apathy, and narcissism, only one question is raised: what can be done to rectify these problems? An astonishingly high number of people are apathetic towards others' problems or life struggles, are ignorant about events going on in the world, or care too much about themselves to think about others. Much of this could be solved through critical reading, which is essentially living vicariously through another being, which allows one basically to be altogether different for a short span of time, and to see the world through the eyes of something or someone entirely new. Clearly, something is wrong with the world at large. While people in first world countries worry about their grass not quite being green enough due to a drought, people in third world countries are dying of thirst. There is enough food on the planet to adequately feed every human being alive, but children still go to bed hungry on a nightly basis. Whatever the trouble, the cause can be simply boiled down to three problems: ignorance, apathy, and narcissism. Ignorance is a lack of knowledge of a problem and is the easiest to solve. It could be argued that apathy, a lack of caring or the will to fix something, is the most difficult to alleviate. Narcissism, or an unhealthy absorption with the self, be it monetarily or in thought, goes almost hand in hand with apathy, but is considerably easier to deal with. Whatever the case, critical reading can help to effectively dissolve it by making people better and more loving as a whole. Critical reading is the study of a text by not only taking what is said at face value, but also looking to come to an understanding of how the subject matter is portrayed. The critical reader understands that each body of work is written by a unique author with a unique individual perspective. Basically, when one reads critically, he or she uses his or her common sense to interpret what is trying to be portrayed, as opposed to only reading the words that are on the page. Instead of just reading for information, one is reading to gain a deeper knowledge and appreciation of the world. As opposed to reading solely for information or entertainment, the goal of critical analysis is to understand a world truth that the author is trying to convey or illustrate. Through this, ignorance, apathy, and narcissism can be decimated and made a thing of the past, and Earth can be a much lovelier place to inhabit. The ways critical reading cures ignorance are rather basic. When one takes in information, he or she has to learn to interpret that information, then must decide what to do with said information. Not everything a person reads or takes in can be trusted, even if it is from a seemingly reliable source. Consider, for example, the Kony 2012 video that recently went viral on YouTube. A charity called Invisible Children created a 30-minute documentary about a man named Joseph Kony, an African warlord. Kony has been terrorizing many Central African countries for almost 30 years, in part by using child soldiers to build up his forces. When this short film was first introduced to the public, there was a huge outcry against the American government. Many asked why the U.S. had done nothing when such awful things were happening. Upon further inspection, though, Invisible Children proved not to be the organization they claimed to be. There was a massive backlash against the video when it was revealed that the charity only uses about 1/4 of all the money generated to directly support their cause, and that most of those funds go to the Ugandan government, who also use child soldiers. Although the Invisible Children charity may be a dubious endeavor and poor stewards of their funds, this does not necessarily mean their cause is unjust. Further research has found other charities that stand for the same causes as Invisible Children, but are much more transparent and appropriate in the spending of their donations. If people had learned to read and think critically, they could have then recognized that many of the problems in this video were not inherently black and white, as the film made them out to be, and in some cases were no longer true. Instead, people took what they were given at face value and assumed everything they were told was 100% correct. Critical analysis could easily transform an ignorant world into one where people are thoughtful and introspective. Critical reading could also cripple apathy. The very essence of reading, at least fictionally, is to put oneself into another's shoes, to imagine being someone else. Clearly, this would help people to learn to live empathetically and feel others' pains. Basically, there are two kinds of reality in the world: perceived reality and actual reality. The only being who can wholly know what is entirely true and what is not is God. All people live in their own perceived reality. Before information can fully penetrate one's consciousness, it first has to be interpreted through that person's natural biases, his mood, his personality, and finally, his life experiences. When that same person later expresses that thought to someone else, it must go through those same hurdles once again, only twofold. It becomes easy to see why people lock themselves up in their own minds and find it hard to understand how others are feeling. Critical reading alleviates some of that struggle. When one lives vicariously through a character, he or she learns to think like that character, to hold on to his life struggles, biases, and personality as opposed to their own, if only for a small amount of time. This helps people to learn to see the world through other people's eyes instead of staying in their own small perceived reality. Of course, people will never be able to be completely empathetic. As novelist John Green puts it, the weird thing about self-consciousness is that you become aware of the fact that you can never fully feel someone else's pain, and that someone else can never fully feel your pain. Of course, this does not mean one should not continue to strive for that goal. When a person has a large amount of empathy, he or she is better able to understand what it means to be human, and enough empathetic people can easily change the world. Lastly, critical reading can decimate narcissism. Although having high self-esteem is obviously a good thing, constantly and continually thinking solely of oneself and doing things only for one's own gratitude and pleasure is unhealthy. Narcissistic people are greedy, obnoxious, unpleasant, and altogether not fun to be around. In many of the same ways critical reading cripples apathy, it can also steer people away from a life of narcissism and self-absorption. When reading, one cannot help but to be sucked into a character and become him or her for a span of time. Narcissism is shattered by this because it helps one to realize that he or she is not the only being on the planet. Critical reading helps to reinforce the idea that any one person is not intrinsically more important than another. Everyone has a story to tell, a life that is entirely theirs and theirs alone, and all of these stories are equally valuable and relevant. Therefore, critical analysis helps people become less self-absorbed and turns them into loving, caring stewards of the earth. In his volume Raise High the Roof Beam, Carpenters and Seymour, an Introduction, J.D. Salinger wrote, "If there is an amateur reader still left in the world, or anybody who just reads and runs, I ask him or her, with untellable affection and gratitude, to split the dedication of this book 4 ways with my wife and children." While Salinger was a brilliant man who wrote outstanding literature, in the end, one does not read to satisfy an author, one reads to better himself. It does not matter if an author meant for his or her writings to be so rich with metaphor and vibrant with allusion and double meaning. An author does not write a book for himself, he writes for an audience. In closing, although ignorance, narcissism, and apathy currently rule the world, all can be alleviated through critical reading. If more people learn to read with depth and introspection, many of the problems ruining the planet could be turned around instantaneously. People as a whole would be more aware of the truth, they would honestly care more about their fellow man, and they would be able to help each other out to a much greater extent. In short, the earth would be a better, more pleasant place to live.